Katrina and the waves, walking on sunshine, the Richie Allen radio show, 5 minutes past the hour. On a very, very, very muggy Salford, the northwest of the UK. Welcome to the programme. If you're just joining it, welcome to it. Good to be with you. And I can't wait to reconnect with my guest this hour. It's been a long time since he was on the programme. He is a remarkable man, really. Some things you might not know about him, but he's a registered nurse, as well as being a journalist. Began his career in journalism in the mid-1980s. And he's written some really important books that many of you will be aware of. Books like The Shadows of Power, of course, and Truth is a Lonely Warrior. He is a regular guest on some of the biggest and most successful podcasts and radio shows in the world. And he's back with us today to talk about his brand new book. He's very kind enough to send me the book last week, and I read it over the weekend. COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled, which is available at amazon.com, amazon.co.uk. We'll talk more about where you can get it later on. The book isn't just telling you what you know about COVID. It's a very important book because it's looking ahead to what this current paradigm, this current crisis, this scamdemic or plandemic, where it is meant to go. And in that, it's a very important read. Let's welcome back to the show the one and only James Perloff. It's been a long time, mate, but you're welcome back. How are you?
Thanks, Richie. I know you've extended the invitations to me before. You know, I was immersed in writing a book on 9/11 when this COVID thing broke out, and I said, you know, something this is more urgent than 9/11 at this point. They're making a final push, it looks like, for their New World Order to really bring it into being, the New World Order that we've been warning about for decades in the alt media.
You've been writing about it for decades, and we talked about that on the many occasions you appeared on the programme before. Before we get into the book, when I meet guys like yourself that I know, that have been around, that have been warning about things, writing about things, analysing this stuff, and shouting at people for decades, in your case, to have another look at it, I can't not ask you, when this began, this particular hoax, crisis, whatever you want to call it, how did you feel? Were you prepared for it? I mean, you knew something was coming. Did you ever expect this would be happening now, that we would be living through this?
No, in 2019, which I now call the good old days, no. I don't really know anybody in alternative media who pre-envisioned this crisis occurring, a medical crisis causing a lockdown. But as things developed, people started to analyzing what was being said by leaders like Dr. Fauci and by political leaders in the UK and Australia and America, the world over, and more information started to come out. The fact that this thing had been pre-known in 2019, we didn't pick up on those signals enough to predict it, but and with hindsight, we were able to determine, yes, this is part of the plan of for the New World Order. It certainly took me by surprise, Richie, but it soon became apparent that they're making totalitarian moves to shut down the economies of the world. That made no sense because I'll tell you, in my own lifetime, which got a flu vaccine shot when I was 6 years old in 1957 for the Asian flu. That was a worse pandemic than this one, and nobody back then dreamed of closing the economy or wearing masks or social distancing. So just put it in perspective, I'm seeing a phenomenon, Richie, which we've always known that the media lies. You know, they lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, just like they lied about the incubator babies that got us into the first war in Iraq, the Gulf War. But never have I seen right now a greater disparity between truth and reality than what I'm seeing right now from the mouths of the mainstream media and the politicians. And
how have you dealt with it? I mean, personally, because I'm hearing from a lot of people, I won't name them, some of them are very well-known writers, and they'll be on the programme in the weeks to come, and they're telling me privately, we keep in touch, that it's hit them pretty hard, that, you know, they feel low and down in themselves, and they've got family members who are really struggling to come to terms with it. What about you and yours, if that's not too personal a question?
No, that's fine. And yeah, I find it depressing, perhaps because perhaps I've invested a little too much hope in, the continued survival of America and that our economy might continue as it is. One thing I find interesting is that on the one hand, people who are awake to the truth have an advantage over those who are blue-pilled, in that we understand what's going on. And we also take encouragement, those of us, at least who have a spiritual outlook, that even though the Bible talks about the Antichrist, it doesn't end with the Antichrist, it ends with Christ. So we have a spiritual advantage, but there's a disadvantage too, which I have people who I know who are actually blissful, well, I wouldn't say blissful, but blissfully unaware of what's coming. And so I tend to be more depressed than they are, because they think, oh, this mask thing is just temporary. Everything's going to go back to normal. We'll get back to America. Will be back to normal in 2021. We'll, the economy will be back up. We'll be back to the American dream. So there's sort of a contrast there. Yeah, it certainly affects me mostly. I try to, one thing I try to do, besides the spiritual aspect, is I meme a lot on Twitter. I try to put a lot of humorous memes. However, I'm afraid, Richie, that if they really start to increase the death toll, we may get to a point where humor itself will no longer be appropriate. It's like if you're at a funeral, you don't go around cracking dirty jokes, Yeah. And if we're suddenly surrounded with some sort of 5G inflicted or bioweapon inflicted real rise in deaths come to fall, which Bill Gates has been hinting at with this talk of a pandemic too, then even the humor may not be helping us much at that point. But that's one thing I also do to try to keep my spirits up. But yes, it certainly affects me.
Thanks for your honesty there. Yeah, I've been the same. I'm not going to get into it. I spoke a little bit about it last night. James Perloff is our guest. COVID-19 and the agendas to come. Red Pilled. You can get it on Amazon. James will tell us later on where else you can get it. But for 12 quid on Amazon, that's a bargain. And I read it, and I'm telling you, it's a bargain. It's a great book, James. Thanks for giving it to me. And when I was reading it, very frustrating. It's brilliant to read it because it's brilliantly written, and it's given me a lot of ideas for the show going forward in the coming weeks. It really has. How frustrating is it when you are researching it and you're finding epidemiologists, you're finding Nobel Prize winners, you're finding pathologists whom are very strongly against the lockdown measures and very strongly against mass vaccinating the entire population. It must be a real source of frustration for you, because we should be hearing from these people on CNN and Fox News and CNBC, but we're not, James. There's been a blackout, and if it wasn't for your book, I wouldn't know of the names of many of these people.
Actually, it was very frustrating to watch people like Dolores Cahill get censored off of YouTube, even though she has a mile-long list of credentials, PhD immunologist, while Bill Gates, who has no medical credentials, gets all the time he wants. And to see someone like Dr. Knut Kwiatkowski, who's a world-class epidemiologist, when he said we need to develop herd immunity and stop the lockdown, he was censored off of YouTube. And Erickson and Masihi, the two Bakersfield, California doctors, they had over 4 million views on YouTube, saying they tested more people than anybody in their area. The death rate in California was 0.03%, and they said end the lockdown, and they were censored off of YouTube. So that's frustrating. But I also took a lot of encouragement in writing this book, and that I was able to. I know what I did, Richie. I took transcripts of these interviews. Yeah. Either found them or made them myself. And then I couldn't, of course, have the entire 40-minute talk by Dr. Kwiatkowski. So Dr. Kwiatkowski. So I took key excerpts and put them in the book. So it's very encouraging for me to be able to take a lot of this censored material that you can't find on YouTube now and put it together for people so that they still have it and have it in hard copy.
Brilliant. Bill Gates looms large in the book, of course. Was there anything, when researching the book, was there anything you learned about Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Did you come across anything that made you stand back and say, wow, I can't believe that?
Well, one thing that the common denominator to Bill Gates, which is that he hates anything that's natural. In fact, I find that the British press has done a much better job than the American press in exposing Bill Gates. The American press, they're like lemmings. But I found that in particular the Guardian, the Telegraph, and the Daily Mail, you'll find I quote them off in my book. I noticed that I never had a quote from the Times. But in any event, the Telegraph, for example, reported on the Bill Gates satellite company planning to launch a $1 billion network of satellites to provide a live and unfiltered coverage of the Earth has been backed by former Microsoft chief executive Bill Gates. And the Daily Mail reported in 2019, could dimming the sun save the Earth? Bill Gates wants to spray millions of tons into the stratosphere to stop global warming, but critics fear it could trigger calamity. Now, on top of that, CNBC's reports that Bill Gates is backing lab-grown meat to replace the meat we eat. Okay, yeah, of course, he's also heavily invested in Monsanto.
He is,
He's
yeah.
now owned by Bayer, which creates the GMOs and glyphosate. Um, he's against natural foods. He's against natural breast milk. He's invested in this company called BioMilk, which creates artificial breast milk. So whether you're talking about the sun or the food or our own bodies with this DNA, RNA altering vaccines, it seems like he's against anything that's God created or natural. And the other thing I noticed about Bill Gates is that if people think he's sincere, I've noted that, at least in my own observation, I've never seen him say something like, people should have a healthy lifestyle. They should get exercise, sunlight.
No,
They
never.
should eat right. Yeah, supplement, build up your immune system, take some vitamin C or D. No, for him, the only thing that will help you physically is to take one of his vaccines that he's invested in. And so that's something right there that tells me, no, this is not a sincere man. Okay, I knew that anyway, but it's just validated by many observations.
Who is he, James? Is he autonomous, Gates, or is he a bloke who has been convinced that these things are really happening, climate change is really happening, everybody needs to be vaccinated? Has somebody convinced him of all of this? And is he a front man, or is he autonomous? Is he something more sinister, do you think?
I see sinister in this. And, he was on CNN with Fareed Zakaria, and Zakaria was telling him how horrible the American economy was. People were losing jobs. It would take a long time to recover. And as Zakaria was telling us, Bill Gates was giggling and beaming. He couldn't restrain his glee. Here's a man who's worth $100 billion. He's laughing because poor people are out of work. Is this someone you're going to trust? No, this is a sinister man in my view. But I don't want to, everybody has a reason that they're bad. They've had experiences. Who knows what sort of abuse they went through as children, etc. But in terms of him, no, I don't think he's simply deceived. I think he's a deceiver.
We're talking to James Perloff. It's lovely to have James back on the programme. You've read his books in the past. He's been writing, he's been talking about these agendas for the best part of 3 decades or more. And his brand new book is a book I'm recommending strongly that you pick up. Pick up a copy of it, read it, give it to your sister, give it to your brother, get him and her to read it as well. Covid-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled, is out now. And it really is an important book because it's knitting together a lot of strands and looking ahead to where all of this is going. And we'll talk about that in a moment now. You touched on this a few minutes ago. People. Have people let you down? Because they've let me down. And by people, I mean good people, honest people, hard-working stiffs like us, who, you'll go and watch a game with, you'll go to the soccer with, you'll go to the baseball with. Your mates, have they let you down? They've left me down, James, because they've capitulated to this.
Well, I know a lot of people who are smart, and actually I ran into somebody I knew today from church, and I actually had some. It was at the post office. I had some boxes that of my book that I was sending to people, and I said, "Oh," I told them what I was doing. We hadn't seen each other for a while, and he said, "Oh, you're an expert now on COVID." I said, "No, but I quote the experts." And I made up my mind. I'm going to send him a copy of the book, let him see it for himself, because this is not about me. It's about Surka Bhakti and Dolores Cahill and Judy Mikovits and all the great doctors from around the world. Dr. Francis Boyle, Rashid Buttar, Vernon Coleman, who you must have interviewed there in the UK. I think you did an interview also with Abraham Adil. Am I saying that right?
Muhammad Adil, Dr. Muhammad Adil. He's been on too.
Yeah, NHS whistleblower. I quote Merrill Nass, the bioweapons expert, and Carrie Madej, MD, who's come out against these RNA, DNA vaccines, and many other doctors and scholars from around the world. And so it's really about their opinions, not mine. I am a registered nurse, though, for 45 years. I retired last year, but I knew right away when this happened that quarantining the healthy is something we have never done in the history of America. You don't quarantine healthy people. It's the sick, it's the symptomatic. It's a person with a fever, the cough. Sure, naturally you want that person, and he himself or she herself should want to quarantine themselves for a little while until their fever goes away and the cough starts to subside. But this idea that perfectly healthy people have to wear a mask and stand 6 feet apart or 2 meters, is absurd. As a matter of fact,
you destroyed this in the book, by the way. It's brilliantly taken apart in the book. This nonsense. It's good that you brought up the fact that you were a registered nurse. Sorry for interrupting you. Finish that thought, because there's something else I want to ask you. Sorry for jumping in there, James, but I wanted to make that point. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, I believe it was the Guardian, and I quote in the book, Professors Jefferson and Hennigan of Oxford looked at 172 studies related to this, and they couldn't find one that supported social distancing for COVID.
Or the mask. You know that the Irish government commissioned Carl Hennigan to tell them whether or not masks are any good. Carl Hennigan told the Irish government masks are not any good, don't use masks, and they basically buried his report and told the Irish public to use them anyway.
Yeah, and I actually just came out just 2 days ago. You must have seen it. There's a report that actually only 100 Irishmen and Irish people have died from COVID and COVID alone, not kind of comorbidities. And the actual death rate from COVID in Ireland is 0.002%. Yeah. And this is also supported by The Sun, which this month in Britain came out and said your chances now in Britain, in the UK, of dying from COVID are 1 in 2 million. So why are we in lockdown? Why are we in masks? And why are we socially distancing?
You know what they say, though, James? James Perloff is our guest today. Dear listener, great to have him back on the programme. COVID-19 and the agendas to come. Red Pilled is the book. Check it out. Go to James's website as well. They're going to say, and they are saying, right, James is a registered nurse, so he knows a little bit about medicine. But that big bald Irish guy in the studio, what does he know? They'll say we've done so well because we locked down. That's what they'll say.
Yeah, but the places that didn't lock down, like South Dakota, have COVID rates that are less than 1/10 the rest of America. And my wife is from Taiwan originally, and Taiwan, with a population of 24 million, they didn't go into lockdown. They didn't close their schools, their churches, or their businesses. And yet, as of last month, I haven't checked the figures lately, as of last month, they only had 7 deaths out of 24 million people. And they can't social distance there. Somebody made a joke. They tried to social distance in Taiwan, where the people are packed together so closely, they don't have to stand out in the ocean. But also look at Sweden. Their death rates are plummeting. They're going way down without any lockdown. So that's proof that it's not the lockdowns. Neil Ferguson's discredited computer model that is causing the drop in deaths. We're developing herd immunity, and this virus is petering out. And there was a epidemiologist Gupta from the Oxford University. You must be familiar with the Unheard channel, which I really admire there in Britain, which has been speaking to experts from around the world. That's saying that the virus is disappearing. And actually, right here in America, Dr. Ron Paul, not only a former presidential candidate and congressman, but a physician, pointed out that the death rates in America have dropped at 90%. He said that last month. It must be even more by now. But he said that's why they stopped talking about deaths and started talking about cases. And by cases, they're not talking about sick people. They're simply talking about people who tested positive with the PCR test. And quite often the PCR test, all it's showing is, this is according to Beta Stadler, the former immunologist, head of the Institute of Immunology in Bern, Switzerland, who I quote in my book, is pointing out that all the PCR test is often showing is just dead, inactive DNA or RNA particles from the virus, which the person contracted in the past. The person is not symptomatic at all. So
that's what Vernon Coleman. That's what Vernon Coleman told me on this program last night.
I love Vernon Coleman. He's got a sense of humor and great common sense.
Terrific guy, and he said as much last night. He said we constantly carry around in our systems bits of old viruses and dead viruses and bugs and one thing and another, and these tests are falsely picking up traces of these and then claiming they are coronavirus. So this is obviously the game plan now, right? So people are not dying from it. Not only are people not dying, but people are not sick. So it seems to me, your take on this will be fascinating. They're now ramping up the testing because they want to say, we're finding all of these cases. Yet, as you said, well, these people are not sick. There isn't anything wrong with them. But the general public doesn't know that. When the general public hears we're finding more and more cases, the cases are going up again, the public immediately panics and thinks, wow, there's a lot of sick people out there and I might get sick. But in fact, the opposite is true. So this is their, I won't say it's their plan, but it's their latest move, isn't it? Test, find as many cases as you can in healthy people and then convince the wider population that this is dangerous.
Yes, in fact, I quote the Rockefeller Foundation, which on its own initiative took a leadership in testing and said we must do 30 million tests a week. Well, of course, you do 30 million tests a week in America, you're going to be finding cases if you consider having a bit of the virus in your system a case. But, you've probably heard this. It is true. We all have some cancer cells in our body, but we don't become a cancer patient until those cells begin to proliferate due to a weakened immune system or other causes. You wouldn't say you had a cancer case because you had a few cancer cells in you if you didn't actually have a cancer develop in your body. By the same token, you wouldn't say you had a case of the flu just because you had a couple of flu viruses in your body. But they're doing something very different with COVID. If you've got just a trace of COVID-19 in you, they're calling that a case. This is not to say that nobody's sick today. I don't know the true numbers today. And I do want to mention something, too, that there is, especially early on, there was a distinction with COVID that made it a little different from flu, which is some people got a very serious autoimmune reaction. They call it a cytokine storm. This is where a small percentage of people would get a reaction in their lungs where the alveoli, the basic cell of the lung, where air exchange occurs, would be invaded, and they would go into an autoimmune reaction, although doctors found they could reverse that with hydroxychloroquine, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, it can in cases be lethal, but it appears that the lethality is really dropping rapidly. But there's one other caution, too, that I want to give. And I have only one sentence in bold in my book, and that's where I caution people that even though we talk in the book about how they've inflated the death numbers by tinkering with death certificates and by conflating COVID with people who are already dying from advanced cancer and advanced lung disease, it's possible that this pandemic, too, that Bill Gates has been slightly hinting about, there may be an upsurge in deaths come the fall or the winter because it may spread a bioweapon saying that it's another version of COVID, or it may be the 5G that David Icke rather eloquently spoke about before he was censored off of YouTube. I don't know exactly what they have in mind, but right now I think it's accurate to say that the death rate is extremely low, but I do want to give one caution that they may have some scheme in mind where they will increase the death rates in the future.
You get into that in the book, and that's very important because there's a real sense for you reading the book, this is the beginning of something. It isn't an end game of itself. It's the beginning of something. And you obviously go on to talk about the future, cashless society, of course, the mass surveillance, mandatory vaccination, health passports. So we might, as far as whoever and whatever's behind this is the beginning, right?
Yes, it seems that this New World Order we've warned about, I never knew it would be a medical New World Order, but Bill Gates has been saying that we'll need digital certificates. And when I heard about the quantum dot tattoos, I thought that was just a conspiracy theory.
Me too.
Then I found out that Rice University School of Engineering is talking all about this. I'm sorry, you were about to say something?
No, I wasn't. I just said me too. I thought it was crazy when I heard it. And then, again, through reading you, I'm like, wow, this is real. You're right.
Yeah. Well, this is a direct quote from the Rice University School of Engineering. Quote, Kevin McHugh, an assistant professor of bioengineering at Rice, and a team from MIT report in a cover story in Science Translational Medicine on the development of quantum dot tags that fluoresce with information after injected as part of a vaccination. The tags are incorporated in only some of the array of sugar-based microneedles on a patch. When the needles dissolve in about 2 minutes, they deliver the vaccine and leave the pattern of tags just under the skin where they become something like a barcode tattoo. Instead of ink, this highly specific medical record consists of copper-based quantum dots embedded in biocompatible micron-scale capsules. Their infrared dye is invisible, but the pattern they set can be read by a customized smartphone. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to us and said, hey, we have a real problem. No one who's been vaccinated, said McHugh. End quote. That's from our Rice University School of Bioengineering. And Bill Gates has not just been talking about a vaccination record. He's been talking for a long time about the need for a global ID, how we all need a global ID. And that's why when you go to the global ID 2020 Alliance, you see the Microsoft logo right on their front page. They want everyone to have a digital ID. And right now in West Africa, they are actually doing trial runs on something. It's a digital ID backed by Gavi, the vaccine alliance between big pharma and governments, funded by the Gates Foundation. A company called Trust Stamp, which specializes in artificial intelligence, and MasterCard, of all people. They're working on a system in Africa that will integrate your vaccination record with your ID, with your payment system. And so obviously they're modeling this for the whole world. And this is why, for those who are Christians, find this very significant, because right now in America, many stores, you can't go in and buy something without a mask. It's a small bump up to say that in the future you won't be able to go into a store and buy something unless you've got this mark, this digital tattoo, which Rice University acknowledges that they're making, which will have your financial record and your vaccine record in it. You'll probably have to wave that in front of a smartphone in order to enter the store. And that's very much like the mark of the beast.
I was going to ask you.
Revelation. You can't buy or sell without the mark. You can't get much closer than that.
I know you've got a deep and personal faith, and I respect it. I'm pretty much agnostic. I don't know, but I have great respect for men and women of faith. Mostly the people I know, they're usually the best people I know, and I shouldn't really say that now, but they generally are the most conscientious anyway. I think you believe it, don't you? I'm not expressing skepticism here now. I'm just putting it out there. That it is connected, that this has been foretold in the Bible, and here we are. And if people accept this, that this is some sort of satanic agenda.
As Luciferian, I was very impressed when Ronald Bernard, the former Dutch currency manipulator, went onto YouTube with viral videos exposing the whole European money system, and saying that he was asked as a top banker. Eventually, he was asked to actually take part in child ritual sacrifice. This was satanic. He was taken to the Church of Satan. And this is a top banker. And this has been exposed for a long time. You go back to Ted Gunderson, the former FBI chief in Los Angeles. Yeah. You go back to the 1950s. William Guy Carr of Canadian Intelligence said these people were Luciferians. It's true. Even if other people don't accept the idea of Lucifer, these people do. And they're not, when I was a hippie, which is, we're talking the early 1970s, we're talking, 50 years ago. When I was a hippie, there was a sort of a Marxist viewpoint that the only thing that motivated these rich people at the top was money. Money is the carrot that they use to motivate people. In reality, there's an evil there that goes beyond money. There's no money in poisoning people with chemtrails. There's no money in wiping out populations, reducing population. There's no money in that for them. This is about more than money. It's about a very evil agenda.
That's a really important thing to be discussing now at this time, I think. I agree with you. It can't be money. My old pal David Icke believed that energy had a lot to do with it. He talked about the stealing of energy from prepubescent boys and girls, as part of this satanic ritual abuse, which I'm convinced satanic ritual abuse is a real thing, and that it is and has happened. I think in recent years, though, the establishment is, if I can call them the establishment, they've been very clever at throwing a couple of major hoaxes at us that they could easily disprove in order to turn people off the trail of SRA abuse. I really do believe that, but I believe it's gone on. I've interviewed people whom I believe. I interviewed a psychoanalyst, a counsellor, Sandra Fecht. I was one of the first people to speak to Sandra, and people started turning up in her office on her couch out of the blue, telling her these disgusting, terrifying things were happening to them. So I think you're on to something there, James. It's really good you get into that it can't be bloody money. You're right, there is no money in dropping aluminium, barium and strontium on people. There isn't any money in that. It's something else going on, But it's a hard sell sometimes that, to try and get people to consider that, But I think you tackle those subjects really well. They're not easy subjects. Before we continue talking, let me remind our listeners. We've got the one and only James Perloff on the line. We are talking about his new book. It's only been out a couple of weeks. COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come. Red-pilled paperback. Very important because it analyses what's been happening in the last 6 months. But it knits together what we've seen, what we've heard, what's been going on, and it looks ahead to what's to come. And I recommend strongly that you read it. It's only 12 quid on Amazon. I nearly blasphemed there. I can't blaspheme speaking to you, James, so I better watch my P's and Q's. But important book. I recommend you buy it, and I recommend when you've read it, you give it to your brother, your sister, your mum, or your dad. Where are we going to? It's funny you mentioned the passports and all of that. Today, I'm speaking to you from Salford in the northwest of the UK. They are trialling today, James, in this city, the daily testing. So what they're doing in Salford today and in other parts of the country, they've rolled out a new trial where they are convincing large numbers of people to be tested every single day, and for those test results to be constantly uploaded and refreshed on the app, the digital health passport that you talked about. And people are happy to go along with this because people's lives have been disturbed in a very dystopian way, and it's really affecting people and it's hurting people. So I see people desperately keen to take the test, the regular test, and sadly I see people desperately keen to take the vaccine. Give me some hope here. I'm seeing people willing to comply with this dystopian nightmare. Tell me that more people are going to refuse it when the time comes.
In my book, I try to end on words of encouragement. One thing I point out is the Bible doesn't end with the Antichrist. George Orwell ended his book, 1984, with Winston saying, "I love Big Brother," and there was no hope. But the Bible doesn't end with Antichrist; it ended with Christ. I think that we're headed for rough times, but they're definitely not going to last forever. But some of the signs of hope I've been seeing recently, and which I summarize in the book. One thing, we saw 2 million people showing up protesting in Germany.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago. We had the stand-up there in Britain. We've had rallies in England, in Ireland. We've had them in America, but not as much as I'd like to see as other countries are doing. But at the end of the book, I quote police officers and doctors. And one of the things that's encouraging to me is the lawsuits. Gretchen Whitmer of our state of Michigan is known as the lockdown queen. She's under lawsuit now from medical companies because their patients are risking death because of all the shutdowns of what we call non-essential or anything that's not COVID-related medical services. And in my own home state of Massachusetts, our Governor Baker is under a class action lawsuit from businesses and churches, which are he instituted this lockdown under a 1950 law that gave the governor emergency authority in the case of a Soviet Union nuclear attack. The Soviets exploded a nuclear bomb in 1949. He's using that as an excuse to lock down the economy now. He has no such authority. It's unconstitutional. And now I understand, I didn't read the article, but I saw the headline yesterday that in Canada, Trudeau is being sued by people against over the masks.
Let me interject just for a minute, because this is really important. Simon Dolan, who's a friend of the program's, tried to take the UK government on in court, and amazingly, despite an excellent case, that the government here acted outside of the law. I thought his case was watertight. It didn't matter. And I do not want to pour cold water on what you're saying, because there is a lovely optimistic theme running through the book, particularly at the end of it, as you just said there. But why should we believe that the justices or the judges, the sitting magistrates, why should we believe they're going to do the right thing for the people? Surely they're all corrupt.
Well, I agree with you there. There are a few exceptions. For example, here in Massachusetts, our Governor Charlie Baker tried to close all gun stores, and he was overruled by a judge. There are some breakthroughs. There was a case, for example, in Ohio, where the governor there, Andy Beshear, tried to, if anybody went to an Easter service, they were to be licensed, quarantined by the government, and that was overturned by a judge. So there are a few judges within the systems, but I agree, just as they get the politicians and the media under control, they try to get the police and the intelligence services and the justice system under the control as to. I'm not optimistic, but I try to give as much optimism as I can. I quote Sarah Conial, member of the Italian Parliament, who says that Bill Gates should be brought before the International Court of Justice. And I quote Terrence K. Williams, who's a black comedian with 800,000 Twitter followers, who said that he'd rather have a fried chicken grease shot up his arm and a Bill Gates vaccine. Yeah. And I've got a cartoon in there. I was given permission by Ben Garrison, a very popular cartoonist in America, of Bill Gates presiding over a 1984 world. And I quote Murat Seyfen, the former world tennis champion, saying that that this whole thing is a New World Order plot. So people are waking up, and I think that's one thing that we can agree upon, that because they're no longer boiling the frog, but they've got their foot on the accelerator, trying to push this thing so hard that it's one thing I've noticed is that if people are affected personally by something, they get involved. If you've got a child who was vaccinated then came down with autism, you're much more likely to get involved. Well, right now we've got millions and millions of people who have been thrown out of work, and I'm hopeful that these people whose lives have been personally affected by these lockdowns will begin to rise up and take action, and that these street demonstrations and the lawsuits and people speaking out and sharing of information begin to turn this around. I'm not going to say that that's likely to happen, but I'm saying that we should give our very best effort.
Good point you made too about celebrities. Here in the northwest of the UK, two hugely famous rock stars, Ian Brown from the Stone Roses and Noel Gallagher from Oasis, both of them have come out very strongly. And they haven't just said that the lockdown and the masks are ridiculous. They've gone much further than that and said that it's a very sinister agenda. We've seen soap opera actresses come out, and that's a good bloody thing. You know, they might not want to talk to people like me, fair enough. They don't want to be tainted by association with people like me. No, but fair enough. You know,
there's no taint. There's absolutely no taint. The taint is at the BBC.
Well, this you and I both know that, but you know, sadly, when you've got groups like so-called anti-racist organisations in this country doing their level best to dissuade people from speaking to people like me, not because I'm a racist myself, but because I've interviewed people in the past who might have been called white supremacists or racist. So, but it's good now to see that these people are actually coming out and speaking out. You know, Peter Ebdon, former world champion snooker player here. I mentioned Simon Dolan. I think there is a lot to be positive about. I'm not going to be a doom monger. James Perloff is our guest. I'm going to say again, get a copy of COVID-19 and the agendas to come, red pilled. Get it. I want to ask you this. I think one of the last times we spoke, you and I don't think we ever argued, but I think we had not so much a disagreement, but a different point of view when it came to your president. A lot of my old friends from the US were very optimistic, even 2-3 years into the presidency of President Trump, were very optimistic about him. I never was. I saw him as just another Obama, just another Clinton, just another George H.W. Bush and his son. How do you feel about Bush when it comes to the coronavirus response? Do you hold out still some hope for Trump? Do you think Trump has tried to row back against the tidal wave of bullshit, James? Or how do you feel about Trump now?
Well, I voted for Trump because it was a no-brainer that you didn't want Hillary Clinton in there. Every single item on her agenda was pro-Rothschild, and at least Trump had the right sound bites. But I have to say, frankly, that he's been under the thumb of the Zionists from the start of his administration. He wasted no time in getting Netanyahu over to the White House and the moving on our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and given a proclamation stating that the Golan Heights of Syria now belong to Israel, as if he had the right to give another country a sovereign land to of a country that he favors. He's been under the thumb of AIPAC, the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, from the beginning. Of course, his son, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is very heavily involved with that. Yeah. But as far as COVID goes, I was very pleased to see that he withdrew funding from the WHO. I was very pleased to see him talk positively of hydroxychloroquine. On the other hand, he's established an Operation Warp Speed, and he's to get a vaccine out, and he's saying he's going to deploy the military of all things to help get and so this gives me reason to think, there's quite a number of religious leaders at the end of the book, and some of them like Trump and some of them don't. But one who is quite suspect of Trump is Chuck Baldwin, former presidential candidate for the Constitution Party. And he says that one of the reasons why the deep state, in spite of all the things the media is saying against Trump, why they really want him in there is because he can convince the conservatives and the deplorables, as they call them, to go along with a mandatory vaccine. But if they got a real radical left-winger in there, there'll be enormous rebellion against it. But we've seen this happen before. When Richard Nixon in 1972 went with Henry Kissinger to decide to China, the former American president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was Democrat and liberal, right? He would be called a liberal, said, I never could have done that. They would have called me a communist. Because Richard Nixon, a so-called conservative, went there. He got away with it. And I think we're seeing that now with Trump, that he's able to get away with convincing people to take the vaccine because he's perceived as a pro-constitutionalist, as he's perceived as being a good guy by many Americans. That's a negative view to take. Again, there are some good things he's done. I certainly would not disagree with that, but I would agree with your assessment, Richie, that basically the control is so tight by the oligarchs worldwide that they're never going to let a leader get in there who is truly against their agenda.
Hey, by the way, if I totally understand why people like yourself voted for him. You had some very legitimate reasons to vote for him. He made some very seriously welcome claims about things he would do when he was running for president. And Hillary Clinton is the devil incarnate. You're absolutely right. So I would never say I told you so. Why I love, because I don't know anything. I don't know any more than you do. I totally understand why people like you voted for him. What sets you apart as a journalist and as a writer who's desperately searching for the truth is the courage that you have to say shite, as we would say in Ireland, in the old country. This guy has gone in a totally different way. So that's your absolute credit. So it's not, I've never said I told you. I gave up voting for any of these people a long time ago. It's the only thing I ever understood was that they were all controlled. And the reason I can say that is because I worked in commercial and national media for years. I rubbed shoulders with these bastards. I interviewed them. I knew how disgusting they were, whether they were left-wing or right-wing. They're all the same, and they all work for the same people. But no, you're very honest in talking about that, and in the book as well. It's been brilliant speaking with you again, James. I'm obviously going to give you the last word. Tell us where people can find the book. I've mentioned Amazon. I think it's a steal, by the way, at £12 here. I really do, because you can read it, give it to your gran, give it to your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, and get them to look at it, because you don't get writing like this too often. It's very well written, and it's not just about the virus as it has happened. It's not just about the lockdown. It's looking forward, and that's very important too. Where can people get it, my friend?
Well, in addition to Amazon, and America, Power of Prophecy is selling it. I'm working on several other potential secondary sellers, because you never know when it might get clamped down. I'll just mention, by the way, the book has 27 chapters, but it's only about 200 pages long. Average chapter is about 6 pages, and we try to cover. I try to cover every aspect of the lockdown, the civil liberties, the health impact, the economic impact, the way they've inflated the death numbers, the testing, the various theories, the bioweapon theory, the 5G theory, the other theories. A full chapter on Bill Gates and all the future plans they seem to have, the global vaccines, the storm over hydroxychloroquine, the digital ID, the cashless society, contact tracing. There's chapters on all of these. And by the way, I just want to mention that everything is documented, because it's very important when you're talking to a skeptic. They say, well, where's that coming from? So almost every other sentence, you'll see another endnote, a number that leads you to the exact source for that information. And I also added an index, because I feel that for a book to have value, you need an index so people can look up information quickly. So I've tried to make this as practical and useful a book. But again, it's available on Amazon. I hope it stays there. But my website is jamesperloff.com, Perloff. And if people go there, they can, in the future, give me updates about the availability of the book. And again, I'm working on building more secondary sellers so that the book can remain in circulation for the public.
Thanks for writing it, and thanks for sending us a copy of it last week and giving me a chance to read it. There is no fat in the book. It's terrific, as you've just described there yourself. Godspeed to you, James. Thanks for coming back today. All the success in the world to you with the book, and hopefully in the autumn, or the fall, as you Philistines call it over there across the pond. Hopefully in the autumn, we'll get to speak to you again. Thanks for your time today, my friend.
Thank you. God bless you. You know, Richie, it's not only great to hear the truth when I'm on your show, but it's a lot of fun too. So thank you so much.
You're a gentleman. Thanks, James. Congratulations to you for all your success. James Perloff. And the website is jamesperloff.com. The book is Covid-19 and the Agendas to Come. Red Pill. That's the book. Covid-19 and the Agendas to Come. Yeah. Yeah.